And the war has triggered what energy watchdogs are calling the largest oil supply disruption in history. And with the Strait of Hormuz shut and Gulf production curbed, global markets are now grappling with a key question, and that is how long will it take for the oil supplies to return to the pre-war levels? Early estimates suggest the recovery could take weeks or even months, depending on how quickly shipping routes and production facilities can return to normal. The International Energy Agency, or the IEA, says global oil supply could drop by about 8 million barrels per day in March after the conflict disrupted flows through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical energy choke points. The strait normally handles close to 20 million barrels of oil a day, but current shipments have fallen sharply as tankers avoid the region and exports remain under threat. Now, the crisis has also forced major producers in the Gulf to cut output. Well, more than 10 million barrels per day of production has been curtailed, while several refineries and export terminals have been shut down due to security risks and shipping disruptions. And as a result, the global oil market is now facing an unprecedented supply shock, one that has already pushed crude prices above the $100 per barrel mark. And even if the war were to end immediately, analysts say the road to recovery will not be quick. The IEA notes that restarting shut-in oil fields, restoring export routes, clearly freight traffic, and of course redeploying workers and equipment can take weeks and in some cases months before production returns to pre-crisis level. And in this short term, governments are trying to soften the blow. IEA member countries have agreed to release around 400 million barrels from strategic reserves, while the United States is contributing a major share from its emergency stockpile. The U.S. has also lifted the sanction on Russian oil temporarily to maintain global energy supply and cool global oil prices. These measures may help ease prices and bridge supply gaps, but analysts warn that they are only a temporary fix until normal oil flows resume. Before global oil supply returns to normal, the intervening period poses a particularly serious challenge for countries like India, which rely heavily on imports to meet their domestic energy consumption, and any disruption or delay in stabilizing supply can increase economic pressure, raise fuel prices, and strain national energy security, making this phase especially critical for import-dependent economies. And for now, energy markets remain highly sensitive to the developments in the region. The global oil market can face a prolonged period of volatility until shipping through the Strait of Hormuz fully resumes and Gulf producers restore output. And well, to unpack this further, we are joined on the broadcast by senior market analyst Hemendra Azari, live from Mumbai. Welcome to the broadcast. Thank you so much for taking out your time. Now, with nearly 8 million barrels per day that is potentially off the market, how tight do you think does the global oil balance become in the coming weeks?
It is naturally going to be very tight, and that is very visible the way the current oil price is, which is, over $100 per barrel. And it is but natural because about 8% of global demand is going to be impacted by the shortage, by the oil production in the Gulf. Now, for India in particular, is even more vulnerable because around 40 to 50% of our oil imports are routed through the Hormuz Strait. So that puts tremendous pressure on the Indian economy. And it's, the point being is that the oil price may not be a short-term rise. It may, keep rising because it all depends how severely the oil production wells have been impacted, for how long they have been closed, and how the logistics and the pipelines, have they been damaged, or the refineries have been damaged, how long it will take to repair them. And most importantly, it takes a very long time once you stop the well from production. It may take months to restart the well. It is not like you start a car engine. So there is going to be, very lasting impact on the global economy, and especially for India, because of the high dependency that India has from oil petroleum products routed through the Straits of Hormuz.
Right. And according to you, of course, the conflict doesn't seem to be abating right now, and it seems like it's going to escalate even further. And this current situation, does India's current reserves provide enough cushion if these disruptions persist for a few more months?
India has reserves, I think, of about 50 to 70 days. So as long as, war goes on and is less, then we have stocks reportedly of around 50 to 70 days. Now, obviously, as the war persists, or even if the war is stopped, but production and sea routes are not opened up, then yes, India is going to have a major problem. There is no doubt about it. And we have to look for other sources of oil. Now, we've already turned to Russia. But there again, I think, as your commentary earlier suggested, these are only very short-term fixes. Because at the end of the day, the globe, and particularly India, needs the Middle East to continue to produce oil and the sea routes to be open. So I think there is going to be an issue. I think Indian and global economic growth rates will have to be curtailed down. And it's going to have, sadly, a major impact on the economies.
And that being said, does that also make India at a point where they need to look at other places to go? Because this, I know, as you mentioned, this is very temporary if we consider Russia. But this, could there be any policy that could ease this particular problem as of now? And could, in the future, can this conflict lead to any rebalancing of the market for India going forward and moving, not just being dependent on West Asia, considering the conflict?
See, the Straits of Hormuz handles about 20% of global flows of oil. So that's a very major chunk. So, and the Russian oil is the Russian oil which is readily available has already been on ships. So you can get that in the immediate term, but these are all very short-term fixes. End of the day, how does one replace about 20% of, the Persian Gulf oil? And that is really the major consideration. And obviously, I think the lifting of sanctions against Russia may have to be even further extended because I don't see the Persian Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz, a normalcy returning, even if the war ceases, in a few days, which, mind you, at the moment, the position taken by the Iranian government is that we will continue to punish countries which are supporting US bases. And they are not prepared to sit down for negotiations because they have found that negotiations do not really come to any permanent peace. As an excuse the US and Israel use to continue to bombard them. And that is the major issue today because Iran is very clear that they are not willing to sit down for ceasefire negotiation. Unlike in the past, when, in the last conflict in 2025, the Iranians sat down, but now we have a more radical Iranian leadership, which is they are willing to take the pain. They're willing to pain of continued bombardment, but they want a permanent solution, and that maybe that no U.S. bases are in that region, which means a very major reorientation of U.S. Geopolitical and military strategy. So these are very significant changes which neither side probably are willing to concede. So you may see a problem where the war will continue, and all these which are heavily dependent on Gulf oil and petroleum products from the Gulf could have a significant impact.
That being said, we also have reports where Donald Trump, and of course it is clarified that Trump has said that these U.S. strikes obliterated military targets on Karg Island. The Karg Island is another extremely important island considering the, if we look at how much it means for Iran. And now what it looks like is Trump is attacking Karg Island to try and take over it. What kind of effect will that make? Is that like a point? Will that move help Trump secure Hormuz at this point in time? How do you analyze this move by Trump?
Iran has made it very clear, and publicly so, that if its oil facilities are attacked, they are going to attack all the oil facilities in the Persian Gulf and in the neighboring region, which means there's going to be a huge global shock on oil production. And we have to take the Iranian assertions extremely seriously, because prior to this attack, unprovoked attack by US and Israel, they had warned all the Gulf states that if we are attacked, we are going to attack you because you are using the American attack is really coming from your bases placed on your territories. Plus, there is a global defense and technology tie-up in which various data centers are all linked, interlinked with the U.S. Central Command. So even if they don't physically use their bases, all the intelligence gathering is coming from a common pool. And therefore, it is really the Gulf states, the US and Israel, which are in effect directly attacking Iran. And if Trump sadly makes the mistake of attacking Iranian oil fields, then all hell is going to break loose in the Middle East, because then the entire oil infrastructure of all the Gulf states are going to be attacked. And that's going to be catastrophic for global economies.
So do you think that he's taking the risk? But then we also have Trump also saying that on being asked about, well, when will the Navy start escorting tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, he said it will happen very soon. Do you think that, how would you analyze the statement coming from Trump, when he's also has already, according to him, obliterated military at the Kharg Island?
See, the issue is you may destroy the Iranian Navy, you may destroy the Iranian Air Force, but they are insignificant in the scheme of things. You really have to destroy Iran's a huge supply of ballistic missiles, which are all underground and which so far has not been impacted. So hence, and if the US or any of its allies try to escort and use their naval ship to escort tankers, they're going to be obliterated in the Gulf, because the straits are extremely narrow and is completely controlled by Iran through land-based anti-ship missiles from sea drone ships. So it's going to be catastrophic. And I think the US Navy has made it very clear that they are uninterested in sending their ships. Even their carriers are stationed about 1,000 kilometers away. So the carriers and the US naval ships, even now, I made it very clear they're not going to come closer to the Persian Gulf. So if Trump again, sadly, orders the US ships to escort, it's going to just be a burial ground. The Persian Gulf is going to be a burial ground for the US naval ships.
And also, how do you analyze when we talk about Russia? It has absolutely gained from this, especially after the sanctions release. And we've also had articles about how much Russia has been earning after the sanctions were removed. It's a different question, but how do you think it impacts the war in Ukraine at this moment, where Russia, of course, that will be helping the money that Russia is being earning after the sanctions were at the moment paused by Trump? How do you analyze Russia going forward with this kind of development in its economy, which apparently was static during its war with Ukraine?
Yeah, but even after the war commenced in Ukraine, I think initially the Russian economy did take a dip, but subsequently it has only emerged stronger. And because of the lifting of sanctions, its economy is going to get a boost. Because mind you, earlier India was purchasing Russian oil at a discount. Now, because we forsake the Russian oil on the instructions of Trump and the US government, we may not get Russian oil at a discount, and we may well have to pay market price. So therefore, their earnings and their economy will get a boost. Obviously, it will boost their military. But you have to also look at the kind of resources that military resources that they were earlier giving Ukraine. And now all of that is going to get diverted to support Israel and to try to beef up the Israeli military. So in two ways, Russia is going to benefit, because the military assistance to Ukraine is going to come down drastically, as well as the earnings that Russia makes from its oil exports is going to increase. So definitely it is a very net positive for Russia.
And also, we have these two European nations that have reportedly opened diplomatic channels, and of course, it comes after they also want their ships to sail through the Strait of Hormuz. Do you think there has been a shift, and even in U.S. allies, and where do you think this is going when it comes to, U.S. trying to assert that we're going to have our navies escorting your ships? On the other hand, Italy trying to reach out to Iran for its ships to sail in Strait of Hormuz.
See, what I think the globe and even US and Israel did not expect that this war is going to see probably a totally restructuring of US military influence and geopolitical influence in the Middle East. Because Iran has made it very clear that any nation which supports this war against them, they are not going to allow any of their ships to move out of the Straits of Hormuz. So if anyone wants a free, unassisted movement of their ships, they have to come out of their military support to America. They may have to even forsake their bases or their military presence in those bases, which is going to definitely curtail U.S. influence in the entire region. So unless they're prepared to do that, I don't see Iran, allowing their ships to go through the Straits of Hormuz.
Well, of course, it looks like this problem seems to be growing and no solution there. But thank you so much for analyzing it all for us so clearly. Appreciate you coming on the broadcast.
Thank you very much.